She shattered my dish in front of everyone and screamed that I had no right to step into that house, the house I had been secretly paying for. So, how did I end up as the one being thrown out? My name is Regina. I'm a freelance financial consultant, a widow, and most importantly, a mother of two. For years, I believed I was holding my family together. Tonight, I learned I was just the invisible thread they were all too willing to cut. Let me tell you what really happened. The crystal chandelier above the dining table cast a harsh, unforgiving light across the room, illuminating every polished surface and every forced smile. It was my mother's birthday, and everything had been arranged to look perfect, at least on the surface. The table was set with her finest china, silverware aligned with obsessive precision, wine glasses catching the light like tiny prisms. But beneath all that elegance, the air felt tight, suffocating. I stood just outside the dining room entrance for a moment, steadying my breath, holding a heavy ceramic dish with both hands. I had spent hours preparing it, my mother's favorite casserole, the same recipe she used to make when I was a child. Back then, food meant comfort. Tonight, I hoped it might mean peace. But deep down, I already knew better. As I stepped forward, heels clicking softly against the marble floor, I felt her eyes on me. Mindy. My older sister didn't greet me. She didn't smile. She didn't even pretend to be polite. Her gaze was cold, sharp, calculating, like she was measuring my worth in real time and finding it lacking. I forced a small smile anyway. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said gently as I approached the table. My mother, seated at the head like a queen presiding over her court, barely acknowledged me. She lifted her wine glass, took a slow sip, and gave me a look that felt more like judgment than affection. Still, I told myself to stay calm. For my children. For the promise I made years ago, I carefully stepped closer, lowering the dish toward the center of the table. And then, a sudden, violent movement. Mindy's arm shot out without warning. Before I could even react, her hand struck the edge of the dish, knocking it straight out of my grasp. Time seemed to slow for a split second. Then, crash. The sound exploded through the room as the ceramic shattered against the marble floor, food splattering in every direction. Conversations died instantly. Forks froze midair. Every single person in that room turned to look at me, or rather, at the mess at my feet. My heart dropped into my stomach. "What are you doing?" I whispered, stunned, barely able to process what had just happened. But Mindy didn't look shocked. She didn't look apologetic. She looked satisfied. She straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. "You have no right to step into this house with that cheap trash," she snapped, her voice loud, sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'm the eldest here. This is my home. Get out." A ripple of discomfort moved through the guests, but no one spoke. No one intervened. I felt every pair of eyes on me, judging, curious, entertained, humiliated. I swallowed hard and instinctively turned toward the only person who could have stopped this. My mother. She sat there, perfectly composed, as if nothing unusual had just occurred. Slowly, deliberately, she brought her glass to her lips again and took another sip of wine. Then she looked at me and smiled. Not a warm smile, not a comforting one. A cold, distant, almost amused smile. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. It wasn't the broken dish on the floor. It wasn't the embarrassment. It was the realization that she wasn't going to defend me. Not now. Not ever. For years, I had told myself that things weren't as bad as they seemed, that family was complicated, that love sometimes came in strange, painful forms. But standing there, surrounded by strangers in my own family's home, I finally saw the truth for what it was. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a sister. I was a convenience. A resource. A silent provider they didn't even feel the need to respect. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't defend myself. Because suddenly, I understood something very clearly. No explanation I gave would matter to people who had already decided my place. So instead, I bent down quietly, picked up my purse, and walked away. The silence followed me as I crossed the room. No one stopped me. No one called my name. By the time I reached the front door, the chatter had already started to return behind me, as if I had never been there at all. Outside, the rain hit me immediately. Cold, heavy, relentless. I barely noticed. I walked to my car, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat with trembling hands. For a moment, I just sat there, staring blankly at the rain cascading down the windshield. Then I heard a small, shaky voice behind me. "Mom, are we in trouble?" I looked up into the rearview mirror. Lucas, my 10-year-old son, was trying to wipe away his tears, his small shoulders stiff with confusion. Beside him, Bella had curled herself into a tight ball against the door, her little hands clutching her dress as if it could protect her. My chest tightened painfully. They had seen everything, heard everything. And that was something I could never forgive. "I'm sorry," I whispered, more to myself than to them. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine humming to life beneath the storm's roar. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the rain, moving back and forth in a frantic rhythm that matched the chaos inside my chest. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of the house in the rearview mirror. Warm lights glowing, perfect on the outside, rotten at its core. My grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. For years, I had endured their insults. For years, I had swallowed my pride. For years, I had convinced myself that if I just gave a little more, tried a little harder, things would change. But tonight, they crossed a line they could never uncross. I glanced at my children again, their frightened faces reflected in the dim light. And something inside me shifted. Not anger, not sadness. Something colder, clearer, final. I reached over, grabbed my phone from the passenger seat, and unlocked it with steady hands. The screen lit up, illuminating the car in a faint blue glow. My banking app was already open. My thumb hovered over the screen for just a second. Then I took a slow breath and made a silent promise to myself, to my children. No more. "The bank closes tonight," I murmured. And with that, I tapped. The rain kept pounding against the windshield as I drove, each drop blurring the world outside into streaks of gray. The wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm, but they couldn't clear the heaviness settling in my chest. My children had gone quiet in the back seat, too quiet. The kind of silence that only comes when something inside them has been shaken. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and let out a slow breath. This wasn't just about tonight. It had never been just about tonight. Everything that had happened at that table, every word, every look, every ounce of humiliation, it was the result of something much deeper, something that had been building for years while I kept telling myself I could handle it. 4 years ago, my life looked completely different. Back then, I wasn't the woman driving through a storm with 2 frightened children in the back seat. I was a wife, a partner, someone who believed that no matter how difficult life got, I wouldn't have to face it alone. My husband, Wade, was an engineer, brilliant, patient, and the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. He had this quiet confidence about him, like he already knew everything would work out, even when things seemed uncertain. But life doesn't care about quiet confidence. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't warn you. One ordinary morning, he left for work, and he never came home. The call came in the afternoon. A construction accident. By the time I reached the hospital, there was nothing left to say, nothing left to fix, nothing left to hold on to, except the echo of a life that had ended too soon. I remember sitting in that sterile room, staring at the wall while people spoke around me. Words like compensation, insurance, liability, floated through the air as if they belonged to someone else's life. But they didn't. They belonged to mine now. In the months that followed, I received the settlement and life insurance payout. After everything was processed, it came to around $5 million, a number that didn't feel real, not when it was tied to the cost of losing the person who mattered most. I made a decision early on, one that would shape everything that came after. I told no one, not my friends, not my extended family, and especially not my mother or my sister, because I knew them. I knew exactly what money did to people who already believed they deserved more than they earned. Instead, I did what Wade would have wanted. I set up trust funds for Lucas and Bella, making sure their future education, housing, security was protected, no matter what happened to me. I invested conservatively, carefully, choosing stability over risk. And for myself, I chose a smaller life, a modest apartment, a used car with more miles than I cared to count, clothes from discount racks, grocery coupons. I built a life that looked ordinary, even struggling, if you didn't look too closely. Not because I had to, but because I wanted my children to grow up understanding the value of what they had, not assuming the world owed them more. And maybe a small part of me believed that if my family thought I was just getting by, they wouldn't ask for more than I could give. I was wrong. It started small. A bill here, a request there. My mother would call, her voice laced with concern about her health, her expenses, how hard things were getting. My sister, Mindy, would follow up with something more direct: rent issues, unexpected costs, social obligations she couldn't afford to mess up. At first, I helped because it felt like the right thing to do. Then I helped because I felt guilty. And eventually, I helped because it became expected. The shift was subtle, almost invisible at first. Gratitude faded. Requests turned into assumptions. Assumptions turned into demands. Mindy, especially, had always believed that life owed her something extra simply because she was the eldest. Growing up, she carried that title like a crown. And when I married Wade, when my life became stable, comfortable, she saw it as something that should have been hers. She never said it outright. But it was always there, beneath the surface. In the way she looked at me, in the way she dismissed Wade's success as luck, in the way she spoke about my life as if it had been handed to me instead of built together, piece by piece. She married Travis, a man who had more confidence than capability. He drifted from job to job, never staying long enough to build anything real, but always expecting to be treated like someone important. And somehow, in Mindy's version of reality, that made them deserving of the life I had. So I gave. I covered their mortgage when they fell behind, disguising it as temporary help. I paid off debts they never told me the full truth about. I added Mindy as an authorized user on a credit card strictly for emergencies, groceries, household needs, medical expenses for our mother. That was the agreement. At least, it was supposed to be. I also took care of my mother's medical bills, setting up monthly transfers to ensure she never had to worry about her prescriptions or treatments. She often spoke about her fragile health, her heart condition, how stress affected her. I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to believe her, because the alternative that she was using her own vulnerability as leverage was too painful to accept. Every month, I sent money. Every month, they spent it. And every time I saw them designer bags on Mindy's arm, expensive dinners posted on social media, vacations disguised as necessary breaks, I told myself it wasn't my place to judge. I told myself family mattered more than money. I told myself I was honoring my father. That promise, it weighed on me more than anything else. I could still see him, lying in that hospital bed, his hand weak but steady as he held mine. "Take care of your mother," he had said softly. "And your sister, she's difficult, but she's still your family. Be patient, be kind, keep the peace." I had nodded through tears, promising him I would. And I kept that promise. Even when it meant swallowing words I wanted to say. Even when it meant accepting disrespect I didn't deserve. Even when it meant letting my children see me treated as less than. I convinced myself it was temporary. That one day, they would appreciate everything. That one day, things would balance out. But deep down, I think I knew the truth long before tonight. Because love doesn't look like constant taking. Family doesn't feel like walking on eggshells. And respect. Respect isn't something you have to beg for. The car slowed as I approached a red light, the glow reflecting off the wet pavement like a warning. In the rearview mirror, I saw Lucas staring out the window, his expression distant, while Bella had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her small body still curled tightly against the seat. My heart ached. I had spent 4 years trying to protect them from this, trying to shield them from the sharp edges of my family's behavior. But tonight, The truth had broken through. They had seen it. They had felt it. And I couldn't undo that. The light turned green, but I didn't move right away. Instead, I sat there for just a second longer, letting a single thought settle into place clearer than anything I had felt in years. I hadn't been keeping the family together. I had been holding it up, alone. And the moment I stopped, everything would fall. The question was no longer whether it would. It was whether I was finally ready to let it. I pressed the gas gently, the car moving forward into the rain once more. Behind me was everything I had tried to preserve. Ahead of me was something I hadn't allowed myself to consider until now. A life without them. 2 weeks before that dinner, before the shattered dish, before the rain, before something inside me finally broke, my phone rang on what should have been a peaceful Sunday morning. I was sitting at the small kitchen table in our apartment, helping Lucas glue tiny pieces of cardboard onto his science project. He was building some kind of solar system model, his brows furrowed in concentration as he tried to keep Saturn's rings from tilting sideways. Bella sat beside us with a box of crayons, humming softly as she filled a page with bright, uneven colors. For a moment, everything felt normal, quiet, safe. Then my phone buzzed against the table, vibrating just enough to pull me out of that fragile calm. I glanced at the screen, and my chest tightened almost instantly. Mindy. I didn't even need to answer to know what kind of conversation it would be. Still, I picked it up. Because that's what I had always done. Hello? She didn't greet me. Didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask about the kids. She went straight to the point. Mom's birthday is coming up, she said, her tone already sharp with expectation. I've decided we're hosting it at the country club in Alpharetta, the platinum package. I blinked, taken aback by the certainty in her voice. Not a suggestion, not a discussion. A decision. The platinum package? I repeated slowly, trying to keep my tone even. Mindy, that's extremely expensive. Why don't we just do something at home? I can cook. Something simple, something meaningful. She let out a short, mocking laugh. Simple? She cut in. You mean cheap? I closed my eyes for a second, steadying myself. It's not about cheap, I said quietly. It's about family. About spending time together without— Oh, please, she interrupted again, her voice dripping with disdain. No one wants to sit around eating your little homemade dishes like we're struggling. Mom deserves something elegant, something that actually looks respectable. I could feel the conversation slipping into familiar territory, the kind where no matter what I said, I would be wrong. She would appreciate something heartfelt. I tried again, softer this time. We don't need a champagne tower and a seafood bar to show that we care. There was a pause on the other end. Then her voice came back, colder. As your older sister, she said, emphasizing each word, I'm telling you what needs to be done. You married rich, Regina. Stop pretending you didn't. It's time you started acting like it, and do your duty. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were new, but because of how easily she reduced my entire life, my marriage, my loss, everything Wade had built to something she felt entitled to access. I'm not paying for that, I said firmly, my voice steadier now. Not for a party like that. Not when there are other things that matter more. Silence. Then the explosion came. She accused me of being ungrateful, of forgetting where I came from, of hoarding money like I was better than everyone else. Her voice rose higher and higher until it blurred into a stream of insults that I had heard in different forms for years. And then, just as abruptly as it started, she hung up. The sudden silence in the kitchen felt almost unreal. Lucas looked up at me, his small hand still holding a piece of cardboard. Mom, was that Aunt Mindy again? I forced a small smile. Yeah, just grown-up stuff. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't fully believe me. Before I could say anything else, the phone rang again. I didn't need to check this time. I already knew. Mom? I answered. Her voice came through softer, weaker, almost trembling. Regina, she began, drawing out my name like she was already exhausted. Why are you upsetting your sister? I closed my eyes briefly. I'm not upsetting her, I said carefully. We just have different ideas about the party. My heart can't take this stress, she interrupted. her tone suddenly more strained. You know how fragile I am. The doctor said I need to avoid tension. And now you're arguing over something so simple. Guilt pressed down on me immediately, heavy and familiar. I'm not trying to argue, I said, softer now. I just think we can celebrate without spending so much money. It's not about the money, she said quickly. It's about making this birthday special. I may not have many left, Regina. That line. She had used it before. And every time, it worked. I felt my resistance weakening, my thoughts tangling between logic and emotion. I'll come by tomorrow, I said finally. We can talk about it in person, find a compromise. She let out a relieved sigh, as if I had just done something noble instead of simply giving in. That's all I'm asking, she said gently. We're family. We should support each other. The call ended, leaving me sitting there with my phone still in my hand. Support. The word lingered in my mind, heavy with irony. The next afternoon, I packed a basket with fresh organic fruit, pears, apples, grapes, along with some healthy snacks I knew were good for her condition. It wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtful, intentional. I wanted to walk in with something that said peace. Lucas and Bella followed me out to the car, chatting softly about what they might say to their grandmother. For them, this visit was still something simple. Just family. As we pulled into the driveway, I barely had time to turn off the engine before the front door swung open. Mindy stepped out quickly, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she approached. For a brief second, she smiled. But it wasn't warmth I saw in her eyes. It was expectation. Her gaze dropped immediately to my hands, scanning for shopping bags, for something expensive, something worthy of her standards. When she saw the basket instead, her expression changed instantly. The smile vanished, her lips curled slightly, and she stopped a few feet away from us. Just fruit? She said, her voice flat with disappointment. I adjusted my grip on the basket. They're fresh, good for Mom's health. I thought. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Is that your idea of respect? She cut in. This is embarrassing, Regina. Before I could respond, she stepped in front of the doorway, blocking the entrance completely. Leave it on the porch, she said coldly, and go. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. Mindy. I said go, she snapped, her voice sharper now. Don't make a scene. Behind me, I felt Bella's small hand slip into mine, her grip tightening. Lucas had gone completely quiet. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of us. Slowly, without another word, I placed the basket on the porch swing. The wood creaked softly under its weight. I knew, even then, that it would probably end up in the trash the moment we left. As we walked back to the car, I kept my head down, focusing on each step so I wouldn't have to look at her again. Once inside, I closed the door and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. No one spoke. Not me. Not the kids. And in that silence, something shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough for me to finally understand something I had been avoiding for years. It didn't matter what I gave. It would never be enough. Because what they wanted wasn't care. It was control. And I had been handing it to them willingly. I started the engine, the sound breaking through the quiet. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of the basket in the rearview mirror, sitting alone on the porch. Unwanted. Just like everything else I had tried to offer. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, that small, quiet rejection, was the beginning of the end. Because sometimes, it's not the loud, explosive fights that change everything. Sometimes, it's the door that closes before you even get a chance to walk in. That night, after the rain-soaked drive and the echo of shattered porcelain still ringing in my ears, the silence inside my apartment felt almost unnatural. It was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket, but the kind that presses in from all sides, forcing you to sit with everything you've been trying not to feel. I tucked Lucas and Bella into bed gently, brushing Bella's damp hair away from her forehead as she finally drifted into a restless sleep. Lucas didn't say much, but before I turned off the light, he looked up at me with a question he didn't quite know how to ask. Mom, are we going back there? I paused, For a long moment, I just looked at him, at the uncertainty in his eyes, at the quiet fear he was trying to hide. And for the first time, I didn't try to soften the truth. "No," I said quietly, "we're not." He nodded, as if that answer alone lifted something heavy off his chest. Then, he turned onto his side, pulling the blanket closer, and within minutes, the room was filled with the soft rhythm of his breathing. I stood there for a while longer, watching them both. Protecting them had always been my reason for enduring everything. Tonight, that reason changed. I wasn't protecting them anymore by staying. I was hurting them. When I finally stepped out into the hallway, the apartment felt different, like something invisible had shifted, like the air itself had cleared. My eyes drifted toward the small wooden console table near the wall. There it was, the framed photograph of my father. He was smiling in it, the same warm, steady smile I had carried with me for years like a compass. I walked over slowly, my footsteps echoing faintly in the stillness, and reached out to touch the glass. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The words caught in my throat. "I tried. I really did." Memories flooded in his voice, his hand squeezing mine in that hospital room, the promise I had made without hesitation. "Take care of your mother, be patient with your sister, keep the family together." I had held on to those words like they were sacred. I had built my life around them, but standing there now, I finally understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. Keeping the family together had come at the cost of losing myself. "They crossed a line tonight," I continued softly, my fingers trembling slightly against the frame. "Not with me, with my children." The silence that followed felt like an answer I didn't want but needed. I lowered my hand slowly, taking a step back. For the first time, letting go didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like truth. I turned and walked into the kitchen. The dim overhead light flickered on, casting a soft glow across the small space. Everything was exactly where I had left it, clean, organized, controlled. Unlike the chaos that had just unfolded hours earlier, my laptop sat inside my work bag on the chair. I pulled it out, set it on the table, and opened it. The screen lit up the room with a pale blue light, illuminating my hands as they hovered over the keyboard for just a second. There was no hesitation. Not anymore. I logged into my banking portal, the familiar interface appearing almost instantly. Rows of accounts, scheduled transfers, authorizations, everything I had spent years building to support them. Quietly, invisibly. All of it was right there, waiting. I clicked into the credit card account first, the one I had given Mindy access to, strictly for emergencies, groceries, anything related to taking care of our mother. My eyes scanned the transaction history. Spa treatments, designer boutiques, high-end restaurants. And there it was, a deposit for the country club. Just yesterday. Despite everything I had said, despite the fact that she knew I wouldn't approve it, a slow, steady heat spread through my chest, not explosive anger, not rage, something colder. Clarity. She never asked, I murmured to myself. She just assumed. Because I had always said yes. Because I had taught her that my boundaries didn't matter. I scrolled down to the authorized users section. Her name sat there, bold and simple. For a moment, I just looked at it. 4 years of enabling, 4 years of silence, 4 years of telling myself that this was what family meant. Then I clicked, Remove User. A small confirmation window appeared on the screen. Are you sure? I exhaled slowly. Yes, I whispered, and pressed Confirm. The status changed instantly. Deactivated. It was such a small action. One click. But it felt like cutting through something that had been wrapped around me for years. I leaned back slightly, staring at the screen as the weight of that decision settled in. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I navigated to the health insurance portal next. The account I had been using to cover my mother's premiums and medications month after month without fail. I remembered every phone call where she told me how fragile she was, how much she depended on that support, how I was the only one she could count on. And I remembered tonight, her silence, her smile, her choice. I removed my payment method from the account. Scheduled payments, canceled, effective immediately. If she needs it, I said quietly, more to the empty room than anything else. Mindy can take care of it. The words didn't feel cruel. They felt balanced, fair. For once, the final step took me a little longer, not because I wasn't sure, but because I wanted to be precise. Travis. His car. I pulled up the documentation tied to the financial agreement I had signed years ago to help them secure something they couldn't afford on their own. I remembered the way he had laughed earlier that night, mocking my clothes, my choices, my life while leaning against a bar that my money had probably paid for. The memory no longer stung. It clarified. I found the contact details, drafted a formal request to withdraw my financial responsibility in accordance with the terms available to me, and scheduled it to be sent first thing in the morning. No shouting, no confrontation, just action. Clean, direct, final. When I closed the laptop, the soft click echoed in the quiet kitchen like the end of something long overdue. I sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the table, listening. Nothing, no voices, no demands, no tension, just silence. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt open, like space, like breathing after holding it in for too long. I stood up slowly, turning off the kitchen light as I made my way back down the hallway. Before I went to bed, I paused once more at my father's photograph. I didn't break my promise, I said softly. They did, and for the first time in years, I believed it. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the kitchen. I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes while Lucas and Bella sat at the table, their laughter returning in small, cautious pieces. "Can I have the first one?" Bella asked, peeking over the edge of the table. I smiled faintly. "Only if you promise to share." She grinned. It was such a simple moment. Ordinary. But it felt new. My phone lay on the counter beside me. It had been vibrating non-stop for the past 20 minutes. Calls, messages, notifications. I didn't need to check to know who they were from. I flipped another pancake, listening to the soft sizzle as it cooked. For years, I had answered every call. Today, I let it ring. The first sign that everything had changed didn't come from me. It came from silence, on their end. That morning, while I stood in my kitchen flipping pancakes and pretending just for a little while that life could be simple again, their world was already starting to crack. I didn't see it happen in real time, of course. I only learned the details later, piecing them together from voicemails, messages, and the fragments of chaos that found their way back to me. But somehow, knowing I wasn't there made it feel even more surreal, like watching a storm from a distance after finally stepping out of it. Mindy was the first to feel it. She had decided, apparently, that the best way to recover from the humiliation of the night before was to do what she always did: spend money. She walked into one of the most expensive boutiques in the mall, head held high, confidence wrapped around her like a designer coat. I could picture it so clearly it almost felt like a memory I had witnessed myself. The way she would browse slowly, deliberately, touching fabrics she couldn't afford, speaking to sales associates with that carefully practiced tone that suggested she belonged there. She selected dresses, shoes, accessories, built a small mountain of luxury at the counter. And then, without even looking up, she slid the platinum credit card across the glass. The same card I had just deactivated. The cashier smiled politely and ran it. A pause, then a sharp, unmistakable beep. Declined. Mindy must have blinked, confused at first, maybe even amused. "Try it again," I could almost hear her say, a small laugh in her voice, as if the machine had made a mistake. The cashier tried again. Beep. Declined. A third time. Same result. That's when the confidence would have started to crack. Her voice rising just slightly. That edge of irritation slipping in, asking for a manager, insisting something was wrong. But nothing was wrong. For the first time in years, things were exactly as they should have been. I later heard that the manager stepped in, checked the system, and explained calmly that the card had been flagged and deactivated by the account holder, by me. And just like that, the illusion she had built of effortless wealth, of control, of superiority collapsed in front of strangers. She left the store empty-handed, For once, at nearly the same time, my mother was standing at the pharmacy counter, expecting the same routine she had grown used to for years. Her medication, neatly packaged. Her payment, already handled. Her comfort, guaranteed. But that day, the pharmacist looked at the screen, then back at her, and said something that must have felt completely foreign. "There's no active payment method on file." I could imagine the confusion turning into panic. "There must be a mistake," she would have said quickly. "My daughter takes care of this." Not anymore. When they told her the cost $2,000 out of pocket, her voice rose, sharp and indignant, demanding explanations, calling me again and again. By then, my phone had already started lighting up. Call after call, message after message, voicemails stacking on top of each other, each one louder, more desperate than the last. At first, it was confusion. "Regina, something's wrong with the card. Call me." Then anger. "What did you do? Fix this immediately." Then accusation. "How dare you embarrass me like this?" And finally, something closer to panic. "Answer your phone. This isn't funny anymore." I listened to a few of them. Just enough. And then I stopped. Because, for the first time, I understood something important. I didn't owe them immediate access to me anymore. Not my time. Not my energy. Not my peace. So I set my phone face down on the counter and kept making breakfast. Lucas laughed at something Bella said, syrup dripping down the side of her plate as she tried to stack pancakes twice her size. The sound of their voices filled the kitchen, warm and alive, and for a moment, the chaos on the other side of those unanswered calls felt distant, like it belonged to another life. But of course, it didn't end there. People like Mindy don't accept loss quietly. They rewrite the story. By midday, the situation had taken a turn I had expected, but still felt heavy to witness. A notification popped up on my phone. Mindy had gone live on social media. For a second, I hesitated. Then curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. There she was, sitting in her car, camera angled just right, her face pale, eyes glossy with carefully placed tears. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from performance. "I don't usually do this," she began, shaking her head slightly, as if she was being forced into something she didn't want. "But I can't stay silent anymore." I felt a hollow ache settle in my chest, because I knew exactly what was coming. She spoke about sacrifice, about family, about betrayal. She said I had abandoned them, that I had taken money that didn't belong to me, that I was letting our mother suffer without medication. Each word crafted carefully, designed to pull sympathy from anyone watching. And it worked. I could see the comments scrolling, people expressing concern, outrage, judgment. They didn't know the truth. They only saw what she wanted them to see. I closed the video slowly, my hand tightening around the phone. For years, I had stayed silent to keep the peace. But silence had a cost. And now, it was being used against me. 3 days later, I felt the weight of that decision more than ever. I went to the grocery store to pick up a few things, hoping for a normal errand, something routine to ground myself. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The shift, the looks, the quiet whispers. The cashier who used to greet me warmly now avoided eye contact, her movements stiff as she scanned my items. It wasn't loud. It wasn't confrontational. But it was there. Judgment. And it stung more than I expected. Not because I doubted myself, but because I realized how easily the truth could be twisted when no one bothered to ask questions. I walked out of that store with a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with clarity. I had spent years protecting them, and in return, they had turned my silence into a weapon. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. I could keep ignoring it, keep hoping it would pass. Or I could finally tell the truth. Not through shouting, not through arguments, but through something no one could deny. Proof. I reached for my phone again, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped on one name: Gage. Wade's lawyer. The man who had helped me navigate everything after his death. The one person who had seen the full picture, even when I refused to. I pressed call. As the phone rang, I felt something steady settle inside me. Not anger, not revenge. Resolution. When he answered, his voice was calm, familiar. "Regina?" I took a breath. "I think it's time," I said quietly. A pause. Then, with a certainty that told me he had been waiting for this moment longer than I realized. "I was wondering when you'd say that." I didn't rush to Gage's office. For once in my life, I didn't move out of urgency or guilt or fear of what might happen if I waited too long. I took my time. I dropped the groceries off at home, made sure Lucas and Bella were settled, and only then did I drive downtown, the city stretching out ahead of me in a quiet, unfamiliar calm. It felt strange, this stillness inside me. Not empty, not numb, just steady. By the time I stepped into the law office, I realized it had been years since I'd walked through those doors without feeling overwhelmed. Back then, everything had been about loss, about paperwork tied to grief, about learning how to live in a world that no longer made sense. Now, it was about something else entirely: taking my life back. The receptionist greeted me softly, and within minutes, I was sitting across from Gage in his office. The room smelled faintly of leather and paper, the kind of scent that always made things feel grounded, real. He studied me for a moment before saying anything. "You look different," he said finally. I let out a small breath. "I feel different." He nodded, as if that confirmed something he had suspected for a long time. Without another word, he reached over and pulled a thick file from the corner of his desk, placing it in front of me with a quiet, deliberate motion. "I saw the video your sister posted," he said, "and I think it's time you saw something too." My fingers hovered over the edge of the file for just a second before I opened it. Inside were documents I had signed years ago, papers I remembered in fragments but had never fully revisited. My eyes scanned the first page, then the next, and slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. The house. The one Mindy had stood in, claiming authority. The one she had thrown me out of. It wasn't in my mother's name. It wasn't in Mindy's name. It had never been. It belonged to Wade's trust, set aside for Lucas and Bella. I looked up at Gage, my pulse steady but my thoughts shifting rapidly. "They've been living there as guests," I said quietly. He gave a small, almost knowing smile. "Exactly. Guests who forgot they didn't own the place." A strange mix of emotions settled in my chest, not triumph, not satisfaction, but something closer to clarity. All this time, they had built their confidence on something that was never theirs to begin with. "I didn't want it to come to this," I admitted, closing the file gently. "I thought if I just kept things calm, it would be enough." Gage leaned back slightly, his expression calm but firm. "Regina, you didn't create this situation. You just allowed it to continue longer than you should have." That truth didn't hurt. Not anymore. Because I knew he was right. He turned the file toward me again, tapping lightly on the pages. "You have everything you need here. The deed, the trust documents. And based on what I've seen?" He paused, his tone sharpening slightly. "You also have 4 years of financial records that tell a very different story than the one your sister is spreading." I nodded slowly. "I do." And for the first time, I didn't feel hesitant about using them. I left his office with copies of everything, the weight of the documents in my hands far lighter than the weight I had been carrying in my heart for years. Back home, the apartment felt warmer somehow. Maybe it was just me. Lucas was doing homework at the table. Bella curled up nearby with a book, and for a moment, I simply stood there, watching them, taking it in. This was my reality. Not the noise, not the accusations. This. I set the folder down, opened my laptop, and began. I didn't rush. I didn't type in anger. Every word I wrote was deliberate, clear, measured. I started with a simple sentence. I stayed silent for years because I believed protecting my family mattered more than protecting myself. Then I added the truth. Not opinions. Not insults. Facts. Bank statements showing monthly transfers. Receipts for medical expenses I had covered without question. Credit card records detailing purchases that had nothing to do with emergencies. And finally, the deed. Proof that the house Mindy had claimed as her own wasn't hers at all. I paused for a moment, looking at the screen. This wasn't revenge. Not in the way people usually think of it. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was just done protecting their lies. I hit post. The effect was almost immediate. Notifications began flooding in likes, comments, shares, each one pulling more attention toward the truth I had laid out so plainly. People who had watched Mindy's video started to ask questions. Then more questions. Then, doubts. The narrative she had built so carefully began to crack under the weight of evidence she couldn't explain away. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to defend myself. The documents spoke for me. By the end of the day, the tone had completely shifted. Comments that once accused me of abandonment now questioned her integrity. People began tagging her, asking why she had claimed ownership of something that wasn't hers. Why she had portrayed herself as a victim while living off someone else's support. She tried to respond at first, then to delete, then to disappear. But the internet doesn't forget. And the truth, once it's out, doesn't go back into hiding. Over the next few weeks, everything unraveled exactly the way it had been held together. Quietly. I didn't make any dramatic moves. I didn't show up at their door. I didn't raise my voice. I simply allowed the legal processes to move forward, guided by the documents that had always been there. And the outcome was inevitable. The house legally tied to the trust was no longer available to them. They had to leave. Not because I forced them out, but because they had never had the right to stay. I drove past it once, weeks later. A moving truck sat in the driveway, boxes stacked carelessly, pieces of a life being packed away in a hurry. Mindy stood near the porch, her posture different now, smaller, quieter. She didn't look like the woman who had shouted at me in that dining room. She looked uncertain. My mother stood beside her, clutching her purse, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, I wondered if I should stop, say something, do something, but then I looked forward again and kept driving. Because some endings don't need words. They need distance. Life didn't become perfect after that, but it became honest. A month later, I ran into Mindy by chance. She was working, stocking shelves in a small store, her movements quick, her eyes avoiding mine the moment she noticed me. For a second, time seemed to pause. I could have said something, anything, but I didn't. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been made clear. I walked past her quietly, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel responsible. I didn't feel guilty. I went home that evening to the sound of laughter, Lucas telling me about school, Bella insisting I taste something she had helped make. The air felt lighter, cleaner, like a space that finally belonged to us. Later that night, as I tucked them into bed, Lucas looked up at me again. "Mom, are we okay now?" I smiled softly, brushing his hair back. "Yes," I said, "we are." And as I turned off the light, I realized something that stayed with me long after the room fell quiet. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had just stopped carrying it on my own. And sometimes, letting go isn't the end of something. It's the beginning of finally being free. Some stories aren't really about revenge. They're about awakening. Looking back at everything that happened, I realized this wasn't the moment I took something away from my family. It was the moment I stopped giving parts of myself that were never appreciated. The real turning point wasn't when the credit cards were cut off or when the truth was exposed. It was the moment I chose my children's peace over my family's expectations, and my own self-respect over a promise that was slowly destroying me. If you've ever felt trapped between loyalty and self-worth, if you've ever been made to feel like love had to be earned through sacrifice, then maybe this story was meant for you too. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight harder. It's to finally walk away. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. And if stories like this resonate with you, stories about pain, truth, and finding strength in the darkest moments, make sure to subscribe to Revenge Tale Network. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell the ones that help you find your way back to yourself.